Ambassador, thanks for joining us and welcome to CNBC.
Oh, great to be here. Thank you.
How concerned are you about the escalation in tension that we've seen between the United States and China in recent weeks?
Well, very concerned in some ways. We are taking this relationship back, not just 40 years when diplomatic relations were established between the two countries, but really 50 years since before the opening to China under Richard Nixon. The kind of language that we're hearing on both sides from the Chinese sounds like the Cultural Revolution almost, and from the Americans is the kind of Red Scare language that we saw in the 1950s. So it's a pretty terrible state in the relationship.
President Trump has done a commendable job of exposing the imbalance in this relationship, particularly in the areas of trade and technology, where he has made some meaningful strides to address. However, the criticism towards the administration is that there doesn't appear to be a clear American counter-strategy here. Would you agree?
Well, clearly what the Trump administration has done rightly is to point out that whoever had rose-tinted glasses about the kind of evolution one was hoping to see in China in terms of both its economic liberalization and its political liberalization, that many had hoped would come with the rise of China and its increasing wealth, but that didn't happen. But in fact, politically, certainly in the last 8+ years under Xi Jinping, China has cracked down internally, cracked down against its own people, of course, against the Uyghurs, but against its people writ large by having a surveillance state. And economically, that the kind of openness that one had hoped and a marketization of the economy that one had hoped hasn't really come about. But China has consistently insisted on playing by rules that it writes rather than by the rules that the international trading and international economic system has. So that's what the administration has done right. What it hasn't done is really understand what is it that we want from China, how do we want it to change it, and what are the strategic means from getting so. In part because the president has been focused on trade and particularly the balance of trade and goods and wanting to rectify that. The rest of his administration has been focused on China as a rising power, as a power that is now exerting itself in the region and globally and trying to shape and influence the international environment. And these two elements of the administration really only meet periodically, just like the time being right on the clock that is standing still. It happens a couple of times a day, but it doesn't happen for long enough.
So how do you see this relationship evolving into the future, particularly in the area of trade?
Well, I think the relationship will subsume trade in a larger context. The reality is that when China becomes as powerful and as important a player, not only in Asia, but globally, as it has become, it's going to challenge the other power, in this case, the United States, for power and influence around the globe. It will no longer accept that the United States can shape the international environment only in its own interest. It will want to use its power to shape the international environment in China's influence. And so trade is part and parcel of this. Yes, there are relationships that are necessary. The two economies are far more integrated today than they have ever been, and that is likely to continue in some form, although some distangling may emerge as well. But it is part and parcel of a much larger relationship. The geostrategic relationship between the United States and China is going to drive the trading relationship rather than the other way around. I think that's probably the biggest change we've seen over the past 3-4 years.
Do you think that this is indeed the era when we will see the balance of power genuinely shifting away from the United States and towards Asia and China?
Well, we'll have to see. I think that is part of what the competition is really about. Whether this is a turn in power from one power to the next, as we have seen over the course of history, or whether an accommodation between what are still the two strongest and most important powers in the world will come about, that accommodation will be one in which the two sides decide that they can coexist rather than need to dominate each other. The reality is the dangers that we are facing, the challenge that we face globally, is that really neither power on its own can deal with whether it's a pandemic or climate change or other transnational problems that we have. But the only hope we have of dealing with those challenges is to do so together, and finding a modus vivendi, a way for the two powers to live together and while competing, but at the same time coexisting, is the challenge for the next 5 to 10 years.
It was argued recently that the NATO alliance was too preoccupied with Russia and it missed Beijing's growing clout. In your experience as US ambassador to NATO, is that a fair charge?
Clearly, when I was there, which was 6, 7 years ago, China was not a topic of central concern for the alliance. That has changed. There has been a discussion within NATO, including at the leaders' level in the last meeting in London, about the issue of China. And so China now looms larger in NATO and in Europe than it did any time in the past. And it needs to, because China is in Europe. The reality is that China has strong economic relationships with NATO members through its 17+1 economic cooperation accords with countries in Central and Eastern Europe. Some of NATO members are members of the Belt and Road Initiative, including Italy and Greece. And so even from an economic, strictly economic, but also from a more strategic sense, China is in Europe. At the same time, Europe knows that China is competing with the United States, its most important ally, not only in Asia, but across the globe. So increasingly, we will see NATO, we will see Europe, we will see the alliance and the partnership with the United States take account of and ultimately focus on China. The reality also is, of course, that in Europe, Russia hasn't gone away. Russia has returned as a major strategic preoccupation for the alliance. That, too, is different from when I was there, when Russia was still trying to figure out its own way. It now has figured it out, and it is posing a serious threat to the security of the European country.
With that said, though, would you have approached the China challenge differently had you known then what you know now about the progress of this relationship? And do you have any regrets about the work that you did at NATO on behalf of the United States during this critical time?
Well, we tried to have a dialogue on China even when I was there, both at the ambassadorial level and at the foreign minister level. This was a time in which countries in Europe really looked at China as a market, not as a strategic player in any sense. And our ability to get the Europeans to take a serious look at China, not just as an economic opportunity, but as an economic challenge and ultimately as a geostrategic challenge, was limited. At the time that I was there, and as well as even in the previous administration, the George Bush administration, a dialogue between the United States and European countries on China was started to get off the ground. We probably should have figured out a way to do more, both within NATO and beyond, to focus on the strategic aspect of that relationship. I think that dialogue is now ongoing, and if the administration, this or its successor, look to Europe, look to our Asian partners as a means to find common ground on China, common strategy, actually learn and listen to what the European and Asian allies have to tell us, we might have a more effective strategy in dealing with the challenge that China poses than what we have right now, which is a vitriolic relationship in which both sides seem to be bent on accusing each other of bad will and taking steps that are not designed to find a way to coexist and work together, but are designed to undermine each other. That's not something that the Europeans or even Asian allies are going to look for in the relationship.
I guess the question moving forward, though, is does NATO have the means and the mandate to be able to address this problem? And the very relevance of this alliance has been called into question. What do you think the future of NATO holds, given the shifting dynamic that we see in foreign policy today?
Well, two answers to that. First, not the entire world is not just driven by the geostrategic competition between China and the United States. Yes, it is an increasingly important competition. Yes, it is an increasingly important part of how the world operates, but there are many other issues that need to be addressed. For NATO, that remains the fundamental challenge that Russia poses to the security in Europe, including the security of NATO members. Russian troops are today occupying foreign countries, including Ukraine and part of Georgia and in Moldova. That remains a major security challenge. And but for NATO, but for an organization that provides for collective security in Europe, Russian influence would expand. At the same time, there is no doubt that European allies need to work much closer together with our Asian allies and with our North American allies to forge a common strategy, not only to deal with China, but to deal with all the problems that we have in the world, to strengthen our trading relationships and to bolster the WTO, to find a better way to deal with the pandemic collectively than we have individually, to deal with climate change, to address the problems of nuclear proliferation, and a whole host of other issues. So NATO is a relevant organization, both for its core mission of providing security in Europe, but also as the only place in the world where the United States and its most important European allies have an opportunity to come together and have a fulsome discussion on the issues of concern, including on the issue of China.
On that issue, what do you see as the single biggest threat facing the United States today from a security perspective?
The single biggest threat that is killing more people today than in any other is a pandemic, a global pandemic that is out of control in this country and remains out of control in major parts of the world, and that will not be dealt with until there is either therapeutics that can control the disease and make it less deadly than it is today, or a vaccine that completely controls the disease. That is something that the United States can do a lot about itself, although we have failed so far to do so, but we can learn from other countries, including our allies in Europe and in Asia who have effectively addressed this disease. But ultimately, in order to defeat it, it will require international cooperation and working with others. And the fundamental point of the world that we are living in is that the United States cannot achieve what it needs to achieve, its own security, its own prosperity, even in the end, its own freedom, unless it works together with other countries, particularly those countries that share our values and that share our interests. They're in Europe, they're in Asia, they're part and parcel of how we have conducted our foreign policy for the last 70 years. And it is the abandonment of those alliances and the weakening thereof and the idea that we should go it alone and go it first that has made us less secure, frankly, less prosperous, and less free than we have been in years past.
There's one other issue that also plays to what you're talking about, and this was revealed in a recent survey conducted among ambassadors and former ambassadors, and it found that among the biggest security threats facing the United States, and one of the biggest challenges is disinformation. Why?
Well, our strength as a society and our credibility as a country in the world resides in our democracy, in the civic content of who we are and what we project outwards. And when you are engaged in a battle of ideas with countries like Russia, like China, like Iran, that are actively participating in an effort to spread disinformation, the wrong kinds of information, you are deepening fissures in a society that ultimately affect the health and well-being of a democracy. And we are seeing in this country, as we are seeing in other Western countries, a deepening polarization that is being exploited by disinformation, by active interference by outside powers, through a social media climate that has made it possible to spread that disinformation all over the place, and is leading people to lose faith in the institutions and in the governing structures that for so long have provided a beacon. And we see this in the United States, we see it in the streets, in Portland and in other places, that there is a deep fissure in our society that is being fed by disinformation, by misunderstanding of what's going on, and that is weakening our democracy. And when we lose our democracy, we lose our capacity to mobilize action combined with our other allies to deal with the challenges that we have at home. And of course, when we lose democracy, it's a bad thing for the people of the United States itself.
So is enough being done to put this issue of combating disinformation back on the top of the agenda?
Well, not enough, frankly. It is an issue that I think is being slowly recognized but in part because of the depolarization that exists in our country, one side's disinformation is the other side's verity or truth. And it is in that disjunction, which we have seen even on the issue of the pandemic, where there are a whole series of ideas and theories and facts, and I'll put that in quotation marks, that are to be taken as self-evident by one side, and a scientific unreality on the other side. So the difficulty here is that our political system is being weakened by the very forces that are designed to weaken it, and our ability to address it requires us to come together and see that disinformation itself is the threat to democracy and the threat to who we are, rather than the deeper polarization that exists among us.
Ambassador, I appreciate the conversation today. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.